Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Older lass often sneezed and flinched at every bump. When this masterpiece of the Soviet automobile industry pulled up to the Jack platform at the bus station, it seemed like a messenger from the past. The man looked at the vehicle with distrust, which did not escape the attentive driver. The pilot of the rarity bus brazenly shifted his baseball cap to the back of his head and with undisguised admiration said the citizen, "I share your amazement, don't you? Wonderful cars. We've been off-roading together for almost 20 years, and we're not giving up. I've been offered a long-distance commute, but how could I betray my faithful comrade?" Passengers silently listened to the words, laughed at the driver, and hurried to take seats in the cabin. Only one grandmother with a club, heavily climbing up the steps, made a remark to him. "You shouldn't have praised it, Peter. People are not blind and can see that she's on her last breath. It's time to send your bus to the museum." The driver was outraged by such claims, "Grandma. Don't judge yourself. It's time for you to take your place there." There was a friendly laughter, which Jack felt something warm, but long forgotten. He helped the old woman over a few steps, and she gratefully accepted the courtesy. "Thank you, my dear. You'll be far away. I don't recognize your face." Jack knew about local customs, but tried to avoid a direct answer. "I'm visiting relatives, so you don't know me." He helped the old lady to get settled on the first seat, and he wanted to go to the back of the cabin, where there were still free seats, but the grandmother did not want to let her prey go so easily. She caught the man by the sleeve, and in a conspiratorial voice, and asked him, "Tell me, at least whose will you be?" Jack was not going to tell the strange woman about his family ties, but she continued to hold him tenaciously. Suddenly, the driver came to the aid of the passenger who was in an awkward situation. "Something is clawing at the man with its claws. Let your comrade go and don't interfere with the boarding. And you, citizen, go through my schedule, and I have no right to be late." Jack was heavily propped from behind, and before he knew it, he was in the last seat, where two guys were comfortably seated. One of them obligingly offered to sit down. "Uncle, we are ready to squeeze in." Jack corrected the teenager to sit down. "That's what cultured people say." The tipsy man from the front seat happily squeaked, "Going to jail and similar institutions." Therefore, such an offer is considered an insult in normal society. The guys threw in the passenger's direction an unkind look. "Hey, philologist, you'd better shut up. Cultured people don't drink in the morning." The atmosphere in the cabin was heating up. A quarrel was about to break out, but the driver had time to intervene here too. He half-turned and shook his fist. "Hey there, calm down. Otherwise, we're not going anywhere today." The passengers quieted down immediately, and the bus roared off. The village was the last stop on the route. Jack wanted to relax and take a nap, but after a few minutes he had to give up that idea. The moment the bodies were tossed upward, his head automatically bounced to the side. The guys next to him were bellowing the way they liked the ordeal on the old bus. The one who offered the seat to Jack mischievously winked at his friend. "You can train astronauts on this bus. It's a cool simulator." But the tipsy passenger did not share the enthusiasm of the young fellow travelers. He shouted indignantly, "Driver, where are you going? Can't you see that people feel sick? Their stomachs are jumping up to their throats." This desperate appeal was followed by sounds indicating the deteriorating health of the drunken comrade. Jack decided to move to another seat just in case. He knew from personal experience that drinking combined with a doggy could have unpredictable consequences. There was a free seat only next to an elderly man. Jack's face immediately seemed familiar. He tried unsuccessfully to remember where he could have seen this man before, but only at the very end of the road. Memory suddenly planted a clue. "Frank." The man turned sharply and also began to scrutinize the face of Jack's traveling companion. "Jack is Martin's son. You're not." "Me, Frank. The last thing I expected was to meet the son of my old comrades in arms. I hope you haven't forgotten that's the name of our small homeland." "I remember, Uncle Frank. Not that I was drawn to it, it just happened. I thought I'd check on my people, though I don't know if there are any survivors left. The man looked at Jack again and sighed heavily. Except for Grandma Miranda, there's no one from your family in the village. All left for a better life in the city. And in the USA, like a faithful guardian, is on duty. Frank stopped talking. It was noticeable that he did not dare to ask Jack about something important. But curiosity got the upper hand, and he started from afar. Then the bad rumors came again. I dare not pry, Jack, into your soul. It's all right, Uncle Frank. I guess what you want to ask me. Yes, it's true, just like it's true that my father's gone. I wish I'd had a chance to say goodbye to him. Jack looked straight into the eyes of his father's schoolmate, and the latter felt awkward. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to come off as a slap in the face. It's okay, Uncle Frank. I'm used to everything. And many people are not ashamed to turn fresh wounds inside out. On the contrary, they like to do it without anesthesia. I hope you know what I'm talking about. And I also understand that I found myself in this situation more than once myself. Although, of course, I've never been in a mess like you. Thank God. The bus climbed up a steep hill with an incredible effort, from which a view of the village opened up. Small houses pressed shyly against each other, but the rich mansions struck the traveler's gaze with their shamelessness. Frank cast a quick glance at the opening panorama. You see, Jack, changes have come to us too. Bourgeoisies of all ranks have come to us. They want to live in an ecologically safe place. Sincere indignation of the neighbor caused a smile on Jack's face. Is it bad? Let them live, and for the village, gives a new incentive. Frank waved his hands in despair. What incentive? These people think only of their own good. They think that money can buy everything. Such settlers are more trouble than good. He courageously made it to the final destination and the important one. For the last time, the driver jumped lightly to the ground, offering his hand to the old, not letting the grandmother care for you. He put his arm around the elderly woman's waist and gently lowered her onto the hard surface. The woman belatedly ventured, Peter, what are you doing to me, fool? The driver pretended to take offense. Next time you'll walk to the village, not to thank me, you instead calling me names. Granny didn't give up. What should I thank you for? At least for the fact that I helped you remember your youth. It's been a long time since you've had a man's arms around you, Granny. Have you forgotten who it's for? Despite her advanced age, she grabbed her club and started swinging it like a ninja from a cartoon. You asshole. I'm gonna file a complaint against you. You'll know how to insult a decent woman. Not all the passengers had time to go home yet, so another impromptu by the cheerful driver was supported by laughter. Even Frank laughed heartily. Peter, he should be paid for his ability to make people laugh. Jack laughed too, watching this scene, which had kept him tense all the last days. A little released its grip for a moment. It seemed to him that even breathing became easier, and he gladly closed his eyes, exposing his face to the sun. It's good to be here. It's like being on another planet. Frank noted with satisfaction, you were almost right. When a man returns to his roots, he finds the desire to live. There's a reason they call them places of power. Jack, I want to tell you something. Frank paternally patted him on the shoulder. If you have any difficulties, you can come to me. I represent the power here, and it is my sacred duty to help people. Jack looked gratefully at his father's friend. Thank you, Frank. I may have to take advantage of your offer soon. The men shook hands once more, and each went their separate ways. The village had really grown, which caused Jack some confusion. He tried to find the main landmarks of the settlement: post office, school, and village club. But after a short study of the area, he managed to find only a center of culture. The village did not differ in any way from other small villages that abounded in the middle zone. On this summer day, the air here was saturated with the aroma of fresh, kosher herbs, and to such lively and unique village sounds was added bird singing. Jack enjoyed the picture of peaceful life. Gradually, his memory began to awaken. bringing him almost forgotten stories from his distant childhood. This village was considered the ancestral home of his father, Martin. Here he grew up and graduated from high school. From here he went into the army. But he did not return to his homeland, because during the service he met his fate, a girl named Jenna. Of course, Jack did not know much about the past life of his parents. His father did not like to remember about it, so as not to nurse heart wounds. After all, the family happiness Martin lasted a short time, just over 10 years. Jack was only 11 years old when Mom died. On that May day, they left the house together. He remembers how his mother kissed him tenderly goodbye and smilingly asked Jack, "Please behave yourself at least during lessons." Teachers often complained about his behavior, and since his mother worked at the school on the food, Apple tried to her more often to express their complaints. Once Jack witnessed such a conversation. The class mistress, with a very serious look, stopped the mother right outside the school. "Jenna, your boy is so energetic that we do not know how to calm him down." The woman was surprised at such an unusual complaint. Is it bad for a child to be active? I've always thought that a child's activity is a sign of health. The teacher tensed, but replied with a nonchalant look. Unfortunately, excessive mobility is not always justified. Jack distracts the guys, provokes them to whiz in the wall. I convincingly ask you on behalf of the entire teaching staff to take action. Should I lock my son in a cage? The teacher was outraged. I thought we'd find an understanding. But now it's clear to me. As they say, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. What can you expect from parents who don't want to be involved in their child's upbringing? Jack saw how that remark hurt Mom. He wanted to say something very rude to the teacher, whom the kids called a chimera. But Jenna sensed his son's mood and squeezed his hand tightly. And he didn't say a word. Even later, when the class disappeared behind the school doors, his mother said quietly, "Son, do not be like some not very well-mannered individuals. You can't respond to rudeness in the same manner." Mom for Jack, as well as father, was the main authority. She was also respected in the small staff of the school food block, where she worked for many years as a chef. Jenna had a very responsible attitude to work and was not afraid of inspections. She never complained about difficulties. Only on the eve of that fateful day at dinner, said to her father, "Martin, tell me how to break through the armor of bureaucracy." My father looked at my mother in surprise. "He didn't expect to hear you speak like that. I wonder what is the cause of your discontent. Martin, do you think that all important things only happen in your shop? But in the school's food processing plant, things can happen that need special attention too. Our equipment is very old and needs either a complete overhaul or replacement. I've been ringing all the bells for months now, but the bosses don't hear me." My father thought for a minute and then advised me. "Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me that the best way to fight stalled bosses is to follow strictly the instructions. I don't quite follow you. Jenna, if the equipment is faulty, you should refuse to use it. Shut it down, and that's that. Then the officials will be itching. Thanks for the advice. But I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because it's the logical thing to do. If I do that, the kids will go hungry and I'll be prosecuted. We'll work at our own risk for the time being. There's no other option." Martin didn't pay much attention to what his wife said. And the next day, Mom went to work, but never came back. The accident happened before lunch. One of the workers accidentally spilled water in the place where the cable was damaged. Jenna did not notice it and stepped into the puddle. The voltage was very high, and the woman could not be saved. Jack remembers his father screaming when he was told of the tragedy. Although he was big enough to understand what had happened, he didn't want to believe for a long time that his mom was gone. His father's friends and strangers came to their house, and he heard one of them advise, "Martin, you should take the boy away for a while. He doesn't need to see Jenna like that. Let his mom stay alive and beautiful in his memory." The next day, Uncle Frank came to pick him up in his car and took him to Miranda's grandmother's house in the village. Therefore, Jack did not manage to see his mom off on her last journey. Perhaps it was for the best, because truly she remained in his memory, vibrant and cheerful as she was on that May Day. Later, he and his father went to the gravesite many times. But in the boy's imagination, Mom was always alive. Jack knew that Martin was trying to get at the truth. He went to various offices, where he was patiently listened to, and then politely sent home. "We're very sorry for your grief, but Jenna herself is to blame for what happened. Only her negligence as the person responsible for safety caused the tragedy." The man insisted on an investigation. He knew that the deceased wife repeatedly wrote reports to the top management, but these documents mysteriously disappeared immediately after her death. And Betty is a mom's friend. And Betty's mom's friend. She tried to convince the desperate widower of the futility of his actions. "Martin, don't you realize there's no point in looking for someone to blame now? Accept it and try to start a new life. Your escapades are not going to lead to anything good. Think of your son. They're already making fun of him at school and pointing fingers at him. You don't want the boy to be the object of constant bullying." Betty made many more valid arguments, and the father finally agreed with her. After months of searching for the truth, he gave up the unequal fight for justice. This woman had been a frequent visitor to their home since before her mother's lifetime. Jack had heard from the corner of his ear that she had kicked her husband out, and she had taken over raising their son. Aunt Betty also had a hard time over the death of her friend, or just pretended to. At Grandma Miranda's boy came home, Aunt Betty was already in full control of their apartment. On the first day, a scandal broke out between stepmother and stepson. Jack noticed that all the pictures of his mother had disappeared. This fact so angered him that he shouted at his father's new wife, "Where are the pictures of Mom? Put them back where they belong. You're nobody here, and you're not in charge." The stepmother clearly didn't expect such an onslaught and darted her eyes out. When she recovered from the shock, Jenna's pictures were back where they belonged. Jack pulled the pictures from his own archive. That evening, the woman complained tearfully to her father. "Martin had an effect on his son. He almost attacked me with his fists. I don't know how we're gonna get along." Guy heard his father calmly say Jack won't just start a temper tantrum. "I know my son well. I'm sure you caused the scandal. What did you do to offend him?" The woman snorted unhappily. "And I didn't think he'd go ballistic over the lack of a picture of Jenna. I don't like having her eyes watching me from every corner. I can't live in such conditions." Martin tried to keep his composure, though his voice had a metallic tone. "Betty, how can you talk about such things? Jack's mother's memory is very dear to him, and you can't just walk away from that. You promised me you'd do anything to be a mother to my son. Am I not doing that? No, your first attempt failed miserably. Jack was gone for a year, and on your first day, you managed to hurt him. I think he should have stayed with his grandmother until he graduated. You, Martin, are gonna have to deal with this one day." The man looked at Betty so hard that she was instantly silent. After a short pause, he said, "If I have to revisit this issue for various reasons, it will definitely be decided in favor of my only son. Can you be sure of that?" The stepmother quieted down, but not for long. Subsequently, disputes between the spouses occurred almost every day, so Jack cherished the dream of leaving the parental home forever. True, he did not think that it would happen for such a reason, as happened later. But from that very first day after his return, he had hated Betty, and any memory of that woman caused him great discomfort. But the thoughts of that woman were still not abandoned, bursting into his consciousness. Even now, they were keeping him busy. Jack tried to switch to something else, but in front of his eyes again and again appeared the image of the woman who mutilated his life. His unhappy thoughts distracted him, and he skipped past the great-grandmother's house again, so he had to turn back. Unlike the other wards, there was a ringing silence in Miranda's domain. Neither the cry of the roosters nor cows mooing could be heard. Jack shuddered inwardly at the picture of dismal desolation that came into view. The fence was shriveled, and the garden was overgrown with weeds. The house of the elderly villagers was not in the best condition. Jack stepped carefully onto the low porch and knocked. Somewhere in the distance, heavy footsteps were heard, and then a familiar voice asked. The old Miranda had trouble hearing, so the man shouted with all his might, "Grandma, it's me, your grandson Jack." There was a shadow and a metallic clank. Just then, the door opened a little. What grandson? No, I had one grandson, and he's dead. Martin's mine, God rest his soul. Jack tried to open the door wider, but the landlady held firmly to the defense. You're tearing up. I don't know you. They're all fooling old men. Tell me what you want and get out of here. Two glittering eyes scanned him from top to bottom, and then back again. Jack was at a loss. Grandma, why do you keep me on the doorstep? I'm Jack. Jack, Martin's son. Have you forgotten how I lived with you for a year? You made me drink goat's milk in the morning. There was something that sounded like a sigh or an exclamation, and the door swung open. Why didn't you tell Jack before? And my aunt is here. I didn't think I'd see you again. The next moment, Miranda hung on her grandson's neck and began to nag the sufferer in a low voice. I see that I can't remember a familiar face. I'm sorry I didn't recognize you right away. I've gotten really old. Soon I'll be 90 and I'm healed. I'm out of this world. Jack felt a rush of such familiar and soothing warmth. He listened to his grandmother. Happy pictures from the distant past came back before his eyes. Grandma, you are the only one left in the whole world now. I have nowhere else to go. It's a good thing you remembered me, Jack, isn't it? I'm an old hockey stick. I can't think straight anymore. I don't recognize people. Why do I keep you on the doorstep? Come in, my dear. Jack expected to find the house as desolate as the yard, but surprisingly, it was in perfect order. And in the red corner, under the icon, a brand new television shone. Miranda caught his surprised look, and not without pride, explained it to me. Such an expensive gift was presented to them just on Victory Day as a home front worker. From childhood, they remembered their grandmother's stories about how she worked during the war at one of the factories. Every year, the woman was invited to the celebration, but usually they were limited to cards and a food set. But here, they gave her a whole TV set. As if answering his mute question, the old woman laughed. I guess I am the most resilient of all. So I got a TV set. There used to be too many of us, and there wasn't enough money for all of us. Now it's soap operas. At least I've got some joy in my old age. Miranda went to great lengths to please her grandson. I had a feeling I'd have a visitor, didn't I? I bought a chicken and a nice sausage ring at the deli yesterday. Jack put Granny's backpack on the floor. I brought something from Village too, and even brought marshmallows. The old woman splashed her hands. You're my dear. You haven't forgotten that Grandma likes marshmallows. How could you forget that? Jack put whistles and packages on the table. Miranda, why did you buy so much, Jack? We'll make every day a holiday for Grandma. I'll be with you for a long time. I hope you won't vote. As it happens, you're the only one I have left. It's good, grandson. I'll be happy. Otherwise, I'd die of boredom alone in four walls. And it's good that God gives me strength. So far, I'm doing the housework by myself. But I can't do anything with the vegetable garden. Granny. Together, we can cope with all the difficulties. The arrival of her grandson energized the old woman. She tried to please her guest and moved cheerfully between the stove and the table. It would be possible to melt the stove in the oven. The food would taste better. But then it would be hot in the house. And that grandmother is not worth the trouble for a long time. Let's make something simple to eat. Jack wanted to help the old lady, but she told me to do it myself. You're my guest, so sit down and wait. And if you'd like, can you tell me what happened in there? Frank told me, but I didn't understand it. At the mention of my father's friend's name, Jack perked up. I saw him today. We were on the bus together. I just don't understand why such a big man takes public transportation. What's not to understand? Frank is a responsible man. He only uses a government car for business. Otherwise, he takes the bus. That's why people respect him. If my memory serves me correctly, he had a private car. Yeah, it's come up. His son came and ruined his father's and his property. He wanted to go fishing on the river in winter, and his car fell through. Good thing he got out on his own. Frank, I'm left without transportation. I take the bus to the neighborhood. The small, cozy kitchen was gradually filled with the aroma about the wandering appetite Jack felt a sucking under his spoon. Uncle Frank offered to help me. Grandma only looked away from the case for a moment and looked at her grandson. I can't believe it, Jack, that you're all grown up and look so much like your father. And you shouldn't refuse help. Frank is a man of his word. If he says it, he'll do it. The woman turned off the gas and sat down on the edge of the stool. Jack, why don't you tell me what happened in there? How did you get into jail? Jack grinned crookedly. Grandma, I did time in juvie, but it's a long story. I'll tell you everything later. Now I don't want to spoil the mood with unpleasant memories. That's right. Let's have a drink before it gets cold. The food was simple, but hearty. Jack, for many years of life in the state institution, got used to such food, and with greediness flew potatoes, fried chicken. By the way, came and pickled tomatoes, which Grandma Miranda pulled out of the cellar. For such an occasion, she watched the guests satisfy her hunger. She had a blissful smile on her face. Jack, you probably don't know that your stepmother visited me. Did the fork stiffen halfway to the board? No, Grandma. I'm not aware of that. What did she want? I still don't know what she wanted. First, she apologized to me for not keeping Martin safe. Then she asked me something about my inheritance. I told her we didn't have any riches. I started chewing on her right side. That's when she said she'd take care of you when you were free. The appetite disappeared at once, and Jack pushed his plate away. Thank you, Grandma. Everything was delicious. And about the stepmother, if that woman ever shows up, keep her off my doorstep. I don't need her care. I don't want to see her. Grandma Miranda was suspiciously quick to clear the table. She was deliberately loud with the village news. It was only towards evening that she said thoughtfully, I know that Betty is not a nice woman. I didn't want to tell you, but I will. When she was still alive, Jenna came to see me. I asked him to help with the firewood. So he showed up in the afternoon. And this Betty came in her car at night. They were on the porch together, whispering about something. I only heard her asking questions once. Martin, if you don't tell Jenna, I'll tell her myself. Miranda looked at her grandson with a connoisseur's look, and I realized even then that I should expect no good from this woman. I wanted to tell Martin to get rid of that bitch right away, but I didn't have time. They left together in the morning, and I realized they were having an affair. I don't remember how long it was, but not long before Jenna died. Jack asked, and why did you, Grandma? Tell me all this. I don't know. It just came to me. Of course, I don't want to say too much about a person, but there were a lot of coincidences. First Svatachka, then you. And after Martin, although I'm about to turn 10, but my brains are still fully formed. Isn't that from a soybean? And Jack said to the old lady, thanks, Grandma, for the information. But I don't think there's really a hidden agenda here. The stepmother loved her father and was afraid of losing him. She didn't even cherish her son that much, and he resented her a lot. And it's all so complicated. And sometimes events are so convoluted that sometimes you have to spend a lifetime to weave this tangle. Jack had not yet fully adapted to life on the outside and got up at 6 o'clock in the morning as a habit. Miranda asked in surprise, where else would you be resting at such an early hour? I'm going to fix my grandmother's fence a little. Then I have to look for a job. I will not hang on your neck. The old lady got out of bed. Easy to say, hard to do. It's not easy to get a job here. Should I try to get a job with a baton? The man laughed. Who? Our oligarch. He settled in our village about 6 years ago. Everyone calls him Baton. I don't know why. I guess he bakes bread, he makes butter, or rather those who work for him. And he has a greenhouse with flowers. But they only take women there. You should go. Maybe there's a job for you too. How was that possible? Jack leveled the wooden fence and after breakfast hurried to the office of the rural businessman. A young girl without a trace of makeup on her face looked indifferently at the visitor. "What is your business with Charles?" "I want to apply for a job with you." The secretary looked at him more attentively, and something like a smile appeared on her painfully pale brow. "Have a seat. I'll report you." The girl did not call, as it is customary for secretaries, but went into the chief's office. She stayed there for about 10 minutes, then came out. "Charles is waiting for you." The girl did not seem so pale to cheer up the visitor. He walked confidently into the room, which did not fit the classic description of a workroom. Abstract wallpaper on the walls and frivolous decor combined with brightly colored upholstery created the illusion of being in the salon of some socialite. Jack did not immediately notice a small man of about 45 years old at the table. Confused, he bowed for something. What made the owner of the office laugh? "You're shocked, too. I love that unique moment when a new person enters my office. I confess, I chose this design on purpose. I love anything unconventional and even daring. I'm listening to you very carefully." Jack did not take long to gather his thoughts, and after a short introduction, told about the purpose of his visit. "Yes, I'm actually here about the job." Charles waggled his eyebrows a little. "We need personnel. So you've come to the right place. Let me see your credentials. What's your educational background?" "I'm an agronomist. I hardly ever had to work in my specialty." "That's the kind of specialists we need. We're just expanding our greenhouse farms." Jack leisurely took out documents, among which was a certificate of release. Batten studied the document for a long time, and then neatly folded it. He did not even bother to open Jack's diploma and passport. "I'm sorry, even with the acute staffing shortage, I can't hire you. We have a decent enterprise, and we value our reputation." Jack felt like he'd been doused with boiling water. "But in your reputation, I have fully redeemed myself, served from call to call. I'll take any job." Charles jumped out of his desk. "Sir, you might want to tone it down, or I might call the cops." "I don't think you'll be happy to meet with the cops. I told you, I don't have a job for you. Look elsewhere." Jack flew out of the office of the arrogant businessman. A pale-like girl with sincere sympathy asked, refused. The man dropped with irritation, refused. "And what do you care?" This question the girl passed by, but advised go to the club. It seems that they required a worker to clean the territory. It took Jack only an hour to get around the school, the store, and the village club. Everywhere he was politely turned down. All potential employers were confused by his background, or rather, one fact from it. He stood in the middle of the street and looked around. Suddenly, his gaze settled on the one-story building of the village administration, and he made a confident stride toward it. "I can see Frank." The woman looked at him sternly. "What is it about?" On a personal matter at home, once again gave the visitors a glance, but he'll have to wait a little longer. Frank left for the facility as early as this morning, but should be here any minute. A line of chairs was lined up along the wall. Jack sat in the center. "What makes you so sure he's going to show up?" The woman smiled sweetly. "He's scheduled a meeting for 4:00 p.m. Frank is not the type to be late. He always keeps his word." As if to confirm her words, a noise came from the street, cars pulling up. The woman said with undisguised triumph, "I told you so." Frank was not even surprised to see yesterday's travel companion in the reception room of the village administration. "Jack, you come here." "Helen, if you don't mind, we'd like some tea, please." "Yes, stronger." The assistant immediately began to fulfill the task. Frank invited Jack into his office. The visitor did not wait for a special invitation and took a chair closer to the official's desk. He spoke in a nutshell about his visit to a local businessman. Frank grinned, and that's Batten talk for reputation. He'd better keep quiet. He must have forgotten how he'd been a highway robber not so long ago. Jack wondered, could this little man be capable of such a thing? Appearances are deceiving. Now Charles is trying to get into decent society with every fiber of his being. He used to be notorious. I don't know how he got away with it. He's had a lot of high-profile cases, but they've never been able to prove his involvement. I'm sure he paid off the right people. Jack, if you want, I can put some pressure on that pimple and he'll hire you. Yeah, I don't really care if it's just temporary. Helen brought tea, and the owner of the office offered to serve. We'll have a cup of tea, and then we'll discuss the situation calmly. Frank made only a couple of sips and then began to leaf through his notebook. Listen, Jack, tomorrow I'll go to the district and make inquiries there. What's your residence registration? Jack shrugged his shoulders in confusion. I don't have one yet. My stepmother sold my father's apartment, and now I'm homeless. Well, we'll fix that. Tomorrow I'll find out everything. And the day after tomorrow, come here with your passport by 8 o'clock in the morning. We'll register you at Miranda's house. Frank tried his best to cheer him up. Jack, you just keep your head up. Trust me, it's gonna be a pain to readjust. No one's immune to accidents, and I owe your father a debt of gratitude. He helped me out a lot once. I'll be sure to help you out. Grandma Miranda waited anxiously for her grandson at the gate, but as Jack did everything normally, fearing unnecessary years, Jack carefully led the elderly woman into the house and only then reported the details. I stopped by Frank's. He promised to help, but there's a problem with the registration. Betty sold her parents' apartment while I was doing time. She didn't even tell me. I mean, she said she'd help. How do people like that get around? I'm a grandmother myself. I'd like to hear the answer to that question. Miranda sat down next to her grandson and looked into his eyes. There was so much love and concern in her gaze that it made the man uncomfortable. It was the way his mother had always looked at him. Jack wanted to look away, but he couldn't. The older woman sensed his confusion. Jack, don't worry about the registration. I don't have a palace, but I can live here. How could I refuse my grandson? Why don't you tell me how you ended up behind bars? My heart feels that you could not have committed an evil deed. Grandmother looked at him and stroked his hands with her wrinkled, clean hands, and that look and the warmth of her hands gave away a pleasant pain in my heart, something protective in my eyes. And I had to take several deep breaths to keep from crying. And the most memorable moments from the past and that fateful day surfaced in his mind. If stepmother Jack hated from the very first minute, with Robert he had established almost friendly relations. Betty's son was already 16. And for a 16-year-old teenager, he was an authority, increased the importance of the stepbrother's personality and the fact that he was professionally engaged in karate. At that time, all teenagers dreamed of reaching the level of the famous Jackie Chan. On the way to this goal, guys from themselves by training in the gym. Robert started from the school section, but he really wanted to master the types of wrestling forbidden in the country. Perhaps out of boredom or for fun, he attracted Jack to his secret training. Learn, you little brat. Kind. You'll thank me later. When the young man first brought his younger brother to the club, Ethan, that was the name of his coach, resented why you brought the kid. Do you want me to get locked up? Robert confidently remarked to Ethan, it's all right. My brother ain't no snitch. Let him see some real boys. And Jack watched the tough guys practice with his mouth open. And at home, he tried to repeat the moves he'd memorized. One day, Robert caught him doing it. For a few minutes, his older brother watched the boy, and then approvingly said, listen, and you're pretty good at it. I should say, Jack didn't even know what was hiding under the sign of the Scala Club. He and Robert always came to 5 o'clock, and after 2 hours left the hall. After them, the grown men were already working out. Sometimes my stepbrother would go out alone in the evening. Usually he'd take Jack aside. Don't turn me into the folks. If they ask where I am, tell them I'd gone for a walk. They wanted to earn their big brother's trust, and he always had his back. But the young man began to show up more and more often with signs of beatings, and Betty threatened to ban him from dangerous training. But his father was always on his stepson's side. Betty, you can't spend the rest of your life taking care of a boy. and it's unseemly for a man to hide under his mother's skirt. Jack listened to all the arguments and secretly wished he had bruises and scars too. But everything changed when he once saw a whole stack of bills in Robert's hands. His brother asked with a chuckle that he had never seen so much dough. His breath hitched with excitement, and the boy, slightly audible, mumbled softly, "I've never seen so much money. Where did you get so much?" "Robert earned it. You'll give it all to your mother." The young man laughed evilly. "Mom's stomping around. I want to buy a bike." "Cool, but it's expensive." Robert saw the impression he made on his little brother and suddenly asked him, "Do you want to have that kind of money too? Right?" He felt his mouth go dry, and now his emotions were acting up. He could not speak and only nodded his head. But Robert continued, "Dreams sometimes come true, if you try hard enough." The boy grabbed his brother's hand. "Robert, I'll do anything, just say the word. I'm not sure Ethan will let me. You're still very young." He felt the dream might slip away. Jack's turned to screaming. "What are you, bro? Look what a pumped-up teenager I am," showing off my muscles, which elicited the same gloating laughter from Robert. "All right, enough with the mockery. I know about your powers. I'll try to talk him into it." Jack didn't know what kind of challenge his half-brother had in store for him. 2 days after that mysterious conversation, Robert whispered to him, "Today you'll come with me." His heart leaped with joy, and the teenager could already hear the crunch of brand new bills. He dreamed of a mountain bike, a computer, and rollerblades. Then he did not think about the price he would have to pay to earn this first money in his life. Nor did the boy think about how he would explain his unexpected wealth to his father and stepmother. They went to the Rock, in anticipation of joyful changes. The atmosphere in the club was very different from that of the day. There were chairs in several rows in a small hall, and a small patch in the middle was separated by rooms. Jack opened his mouth in surprise, but Robert grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and dragged him down the hall. "We'll go to the stage, then you'll be catching crows." They went into a small room where the owner of the club was waiting for them. He gave the teenager a piercing look. "You want to make some money?" "I do." "What do I have to do?" Ethan stammered and laughed. "You gotta fight. You know how to fight, don't you?" Jack looked at his older brother, as if expecting his support. "I can fight a little, but I haven't learned all the moves yet. But I can do one like Jackie Chan." Even Robert praised it. "That's great. Today's your chance to show your skills, and you'll get paid for it. Go get ready for the fight. For your first time, we're going to pick you a not-so-scary opponent." Jack had seen many movies about such fights before. Only now he realized that this club secretly held such competitions, but the prospect of being beaten did not frighten him. On the contrary, his heart fluttered with excitement. Jack really wanted to prove to both Robert and this evil one that he was not a coward, but a real fighter. But what happened next was very far from the movie plot. Jack was the first to enter the ring. Robert hastily traded muscle with him and gave him advice. Then he whispered, "Your opponent." You could hear the undisguised anxiety in his brother's voice. Jack felt a twinge inside too when he saw a guy about his own age, but of impressive build. He was showing off, trying to imitate the same movie characters. Robert whispered in Vass's ear, "Brother, this boar is clumsy, and you are nimble. And that's your advantage." The gong sounded, and in the next moments Jack flew to the opposite corner of the ring. He realized that he'd gaped and missed a punch. His own mistake so enraged the teenager that he even felt how an unknown force suddenly lifted him above the floor. His opponent was triumphant. He was showing him by signs that he would put him down with one blow. The insolence of this fellow with the face of a pig made Jack even more angry. When the enemy came at him again, he managed to dodge and then used that famous move. The fat man frantically struggled on the tatami, but could not free himself from Jack's grip. The crowd applauded the winner. Robert grabbed his little brother in his arms. "Jack, you're a great start." Took the fat man down in the second minute. although he did have a black eye on his face after the fight. The teenager was encouraged by his first success. Ethan was pleased, too. Robert is your brother, a real diamond. There are some very serious people here to see him. Half-brother himself stopped going to the court because now he had in his hands that mythical hen that lays golden eggs. But all good things come to an end. The stakes began to rise, and with them increased risk. One of the fights ended with a broken collarbone and bruised internal organs. When he was taken by ambulance to the hospital, Robert begged Jack not to say a word to his parents. You realize your father would kill me if he knew I was betting on you. That's a revelation. It hit the kid in the gut. Robert, I thought you were a real brother, and you were just making money off me. Jack was so hurt he cried. But he kept his promise, and his parents never learned about the unusual hobby of their eldest son. Robert explained his injuries by an unexpected attack of hooligans. But after that incident, Jack stopped attending the club, and his relationship with his half-brother became cold. Soon their paths for a long time separated. Unexpectedly for all, Robert, who has always been drawn to dubious adventures, entered law school. Jack still had to study 4 years in school, although he no longer kept in touch with Robert. Frankly envied him, because he managed to escape from the patronage of his stepmother. After the departure of her own son, Betty took on her stepson with redoubled fierceness. She picked on him for the slightest trifle, and when his father wasn't home, she insulted and even threatened him. Jack, however, responded to her in the same vein. And one day, a domestic quarrel turned into a fight. That day, Jack had left school early to prepare for a Women's Day celebration. He and the guys agreed to make the girl's teacher happy with souvenirs of their own making. The boy had a quick snack and started to work. But suddenly, the stepmother flew into the room with a noise and began to yell, "Something's scattered here, and who will clean up the dishes for you?" The guy asked. "Aunt Betty. I have a little left to finish here, and I'll help plate and even take out the trash can." But the stepmother didn't appreciate the stepson's peaceful tone and repeated the demands. "I told you to clean up after yourself right now. I'm the cleaning lady in me." Jack still as calmly repeated Aunt Betty. "I'll do it right now. Why be nervous? After all, the first holiday of spring is coming up, when all women become beautiful." He still didn't understand why his frank compliment had caused his stepmother such a frantic reaction. First, she grabbed his sweater off the chair and threw it in his face. Then she snatched from his hands a craft in the form of a ship with scarlet sails. Such an unusual souvenir Jack wanted to give to the girl he had liked since 5th grade. Stepmother's antics angered him. "What are you doing? This is very delicate work. You could break it." Trying to save the souvenir, Jack grabbed Betty's arm. The woman began to strike him with her other hand. One blow landed on his eye, and Jack pushed the woman away. The stepmother squealed loudly and began grabbing her side, and the stepson's injured eye bled. To top off the fight, Betty Performance began stomping the unfortunate ship with her feet. This savage scene was accompanied by curses. "Here's your boat, and here's your happiness." There's no telling how the conflict would have ended if Martin hadn't shown up. Betty immediately rushed to her husband to complain about her stepson, but he turned his attention to Betty's son's eye, which had turned into a purple bag. And that, too, was Jack's own disfigurement. As a result, spontaneous fights with his stepmother. Jack almost lost his eye. He never got to give a surprise with meaning. The girl he liked for almost 2 weeks, doctors saved his eye. And when he got out of the hospital, his father had a serious talk with him. "Jack, I don't want to get into the reasons for your constant conflicts, but raising your hand against a woman is low. Let her be wrong 100 times. Let her throw mud at you and even make a fist. You have to restrain yourself. You are a man." Jack was unpleasant to hear such words. "Father, I'm old enough to learn the rules." It was an involuntary punch. It was automatic. Martin agreed. "It happens, but try not to provoke Mother again." "Father, this woman has never been and will never be a mother to me, and I ask that you never use that word towards her. She is your wife. I respect your choice. But even for your sake, I can't do the impossible. I only have a few months left to suffer, and then it's goodbye school. And I'm not likely to stay here. Martin, I beg you." He looked at his son again. "So you're saying you'll leave?" "Yes, and I'm going to try to get away from a place where I'm going to be miserable. I'm sorry, but I don't feel comfortable here." Jack carried out his plan exactly as planned. In order not to see his stepmother, he went to study in a neighboring country, and the educational institution was chosen at random. It so happened that the young man had never before shown interest in flora and fauna. By coincidence, he became a student of the Agricultural Academy. At first, Jack was skeptical about the future profession, but gradually studying at the Faculty of Biotechnology began to bring satisfaction. Already after several semesters, the opportunity to engage in new developments in this field presented itself. Most students tried to use this chance and worked day and night in the university laboratories, which were equipped with the latest technology. During all the years of study, he never came home, but Martin regularly visited his son and told him the latest news. One day, the father reported, "Robert has decided to get married." Betty is shocked, crying, trying to dissuade the boys. Jack was surprised out of the blue, but unhappy for him. The father has a strange detachment to confess. Maybe he wouldn't be in such a hurry to get married, but it seems we should expect a new addition to the family soon. That's why Betty's getting upset. But Robert's chosen one came from a good family. Jack was least interested in his half-brother's affairs, and he only kept up the conversation out of politeness. The father spent 2 days with his son, and at parting he asked, "You even came to your brother's wedding?" "I'll try, father, but I can't promise. It seems to me that this event will be fun without me." Martin said regretfully, "You never forgave me for marrying Betty. It was unexpected." And the young man was confused. "Father, what are you doing? Do children have the right to interfere in their parents' lives?" "Yes, I don't like Betty, and that's putting it mildly. But it doesn't have to affect your personal life at all. It's just too late to bridge the gap. Both she and Robert will be strangers to me forever." It was with regret that Martin accepted his son's position, but life took a different course. After graduation, Jack could not find a permanent job for a long time. At one time, he was interrupted by casual earnings, and then got a job in a well-known firm. His work had nothing to do with the specialty received at the university, but allowed to lead a fairly prosperous lifestyle. One day, he was summoned by the chief, and he was surprised to see his half-brother in the chief's office. Robert relaxed in his chair, expecting a violent reaction. "Here we meet. Brother, Rabbit, you were running. Running from me. I found you." "Well, I shouldn't be surprised, because your chief and I are good buddies, by the way. I spent a lot of time and energy trying to get on your trail." Robert, with beautiful phrases, and enjoyed this skill, but alas, was not delighted with this meeting, and only listened to his brother with a certain wariness. The memory was left with an unpleasant residue from the previous Commonwealth experience with Robert, but he had no idea what was going on in the young man's soul. "Alas, I'm not used to ranting about nothing, so I'd like to get right to the point. I need an assistant who knows about the flower business. As I've been told by your boss, you're quite trustworthy. And I intend to." Jack interrupted Brother Robert. "I like it here, and I don't plan on changing jobs." The man grinned smugly. "You'll have to, Jack. The thing is, I'm buying out this company because my friend and your boss has wanted to get rid of it for a long time. He's decided to go overseas, but that's his business. My father-in-law is fully behind me. By the way, I already have a family, and my son has already reached the age of first maturity." Jack heard the term for the first time and was surprised. "What's that like?" Robert laughed. "The kid will go to school in the fall. He's growing into an uncle." Robert talked for a long time about his successful life, and at the end of the conversation advised not to delay with the decision. "Because I have more applicants for the position of one of my deputies. As a brother, I will tell you that such a chance in life does not come very often. It's one thing to be a clerk, but it's another to be in a high-profile position. though a worm of doubt gnaws at my soul. The next day, Jack gave his consent. Several months went the process of transformation, and he was fully immersed in the work with papers. During the period of reorganization, he rarely saw Robert, but he noticed that he often smelled of booze. In private, though, the half-brother liked to emphasize their kinship. In private, he behaved with Jack arrogant. "Jack, you have no idea what happiness has fallen to your lot. You won't be lost with me. Well established in this place. Let's move on." Career advancement offers the most tantalizing prospects. Conversations on the subject of a beautiful future took place almost every day. But Jack had to pay for his new boss's confidence by working his ass off, while Robert disappeared in meetings and more often shone at corporate parties. His deputies literally plowed for themselves and for him. During a year of work in such an exhausting mode, the young man got tired and began to think about leaving. He even found a new place, but so far he decided not to tell his boss about his decision. Perhaps if Jack had not delayed with the transition to another place, would not have happened that fatal tragedy. That day Jack, as usual, was at work until late in the evening. Unexpectedly, Robert was dismissed to the office. The half-brother was disturbed and used his last words to berate the partners who had let him down again. "Brother," he too turned formally. "Jack, it's a good thing I caught you on the spot. Pack up and come with me with the last quarterly bulletin." "Robert, where are we going?" "I mean, it's nighttime. And I have a personal life." By the way, Jack had recently met a beautiful girl named Katya and planned to spend the evening with her. But Robert did not like the intransigence of his subordinate. He grumbled unhappily at the dough. "Stop pouncing around, and don't ask stupid questions. Now we'll go and sort things out. They decided to screw me, but this adventure will not pass them, and I've got them in court. Come on, hurry up. I don't think we're gonna be here long, and you'll have time to get on with your personal life before midnight." Robert hummed again and headed for the exit. Jack had no choice but to follow. He realized that the loud threats were addressed to unscrupulous suppliers, but knowing his brother's character well, he did not want to cause a conflict at night. Robert himself got behind the wheel of the SUV and in some evil impulse rushed out of the place. The cabin was stuffy. That's why Jack immediately felt his brother's stink of booze. "Robert, have you been drinking today?" "So, but how can you drive like that?" "Maybe I should take the driver's seat." His brother gave him a contemptuous look. "Shut up at least for a while. You're as good a driver as I am a ballerina." Robert told the story laughing, which drew his attention away from the road. Jack didn't immediately realize what had happened either. Something bumped the bumper of the car, but the car went forward at the same speed. In the rearview mirror, he could see people gathering at the crosswalk. Jack shouted hysterically, "Robert, slow down. I think you've hit someone." But the brother gritted his teeth angrily. "Shut up. This is all your fault. It's your fault. Don't take it out on me. You should drink less." Police car sirens sounded behind us and the guy who caused the accident fussed. "I think we're being followed." "That means we're in trouble," Jack demanded. "Robert, stop the car. Doesn't make it worse. I'll be right there, brother. Just hang in there." Robert sobered up instantly and clutched the steering wheel with his whole body. "Look, Jack, I just came around the bend. You realize what I'm looking at for driving like this? I got a family. I got a second kid on the way. Don't worry, I'll take care of it." Jack had no time to think of anything, as Robert braked sharply and fell out of the car on the lawn. He didn't even notice which way his brother ran, and just a few seconds later, the traffic police arrived. Jack remembered further events vaguely. He was immediately handcuffed and taken to the isolation center. And the next day, he learned that as a result of the hit and run, 2 people were killed, an elderly woman and a girl, her granddaughter. They decided to take a walk before going to bed, and the grandmother suddenly remembered that she had run out. The pharmacy was just opposite the crossing, and the women calmly headed towards it. But the SUV that jumped out of the corner cut 2 lives short at once. As the medics claimed, the girl was still alive, and told about the accident. She died from the loss on the operating table, and her grandmother died immediately on the scene. Jack initially did not want to mislead the investigation and had already prepared to tell about how everything happened. But suddenly, just the next day, the duty officer said, "Your mother is here to see you." Jack was surprised, but said nothing. He was led into a small room at the school where he saw his stepmother. The woman's face was swollen with tears. She looked pleadingly at Jack and whispered to the doe, "I'm sorry for everything, but I won't put the bag away. He told me everything. You're the only hope. He's your brother. You grew up together. Can you really think you can set him up? You were sober and you won't get much because it was an accident. I'm begging you. No, please. Don't tell me Robert was driving." For the first time, Jack felt sorry for that woman. He didn't think about himself at the time. He imagined his brother's children growing up without a father and suffering without a husband, his wife. Jack took Robert's guilt upon himself without thinking of the consequences. His case was handled by a young female investigator. She was immediately distrustful of his version of events. "Jack, your story sounds plausible, but there are many inconsistencies. Realize that trying to mislead the investigation will have an extremely negative impact on your future." But they persisted. Betty came to the interrogation every day and asked him provocative questions. He couldn't lie and was immediately lost. One day, she warned him before she left. "Jack, not all nobility is good deeds. I have a suspicion that another man was driving the cars, and you're wrong to conceal it. I don't think he'll thank you for doing this, but I will certainly look into the circumstances of this case." But the very next day, Jack was told that the investigation was complete and his case was being prepared for trial. And now, many years later, he recalls that trial with horror. The case was a high profile, so the hall was not crowded. Jack, like a cornered animal, sat in a cage. He did not believe that all this is happening to him. Among those present in the hall, he noticed the investigator and stepmother, who constantly wiped her tears with a handkerchief. There was no father, and that fact hurt a lot, stabbed him in the heart. Only later did he learn that after that incident, his father had a stroke from which he never fully recovered. The defendant did not follow the trial. He snapped out of Tina's viscous, thoughtful state. It was only when the prosecutor invited Robert as a witness that not a single muscle on the half-brother's face even flinched as he lied. "No, I did not give my brother the keys to the car. I was elsewhere that night, and at least 5 people can attest to that." The prosecutor also shamelessly started asking the witness leading questions. "So you don't rule out that your brother could have used your vehicle?" "He could have. The car was parked outside my office, and I often left my keys behind by mistake. But I have a good security system, so I wasn't too worried. And that night, I left my car in the parking lot with some friends." The DA insisted, "So your brother or another intruder could have stolen the car?" Robert, still with the same calmness, corrected the prosecutor. "No, another person couldn't have done it, because I have an intelligent defense system, and my brother knew its features. I had once bragged to him about installing one." Jack grabbed the bars and started screaming. "That's not true. Robert, why are you lying?" It was a cry of desperation, but no one showed any sympathy for the defendant. After the testimony, Robert walked out of the courtroom without even looking at his brother. The stepmother also told lies about him. When it came to her, she let out a tear and started talking. "You know, Jack was a troubled kid growing up. I told my husband many times, but he wouldn't listen. And at the age of 13, the boy got into a very bad company and beat up other children for money. He also showed aggression towards me all the time. And once he attacked me and even twisted my arm. Therefore, there is nothing surprising about what happened. The most surprising thing about this show trial was that even the lawyer never once said a word in his defense. She diligently adhered to the prosecutor's position. So it was completely expected that he was given a maximum sentence of 12 years by the judge. After the trial was over, Betty approached him. "Jack, you should definitely appeal. Your case is a whitewash. You have no idea what it's like to serve time for a crime that another person committed. Jack just looked at this kind woman with a blank stare. I don't care anymore. Indeed, for the first time, he was in a state of some kind of prostration. But gradually his consciousness began to awaken, and he began to realize what he had done. He wrote letters to his father, but he never answered him. Not until almost just before his release. A short note was written by Betty. Jack, your father died after his second stroke. I don't want to remind you that his death and the rest of our family's troubles are on your conscience. Don't bother looking for a meeting with us after your release. We want nothing to do with the criminal who took the lives of 2 people. There was no signature or date at the end of this message. But Jack guessed that his stepmother had decided to send him word when she learned of his imminent release. When Jack found himself on the outside, the first thing he did was head home. But the door was opened by a woman he didn't know. She told him that her family had bought the apartment at a very favorable price. 5 years ago, he went to the city cemetery and looked for his father's grave for a long time. The stepmother did not even make an effort to bury Martin next to his first wife. The place of his father's eternal resting place was in utter desolation, and only a blooming plaque on the wooden cross testified that this is where the native man was buried. Anger boiled up inside, and he really wanted to look into the eyes of these 2 ghouls who had been his kin for so many years. But the company that Robert headed no longer existed. Jack gave up further searches and went to his great-grandmother's house in the village. Pictures of the past often scrolled from Jack's consciousness as frames of documentary newsreels. And this night he was also overcome by not quite pleasant memories. He habitually got up at 6 o'clock in the morning and went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Miranda stretched sweetly on her bed. Jack, are you up this early again? I'll go make breakfast for us, Grandma. Oh, grandson, you're a better hut than me. I've had a spill for 2 days. What will happen next? Will you rest? Enjoy life. It's a sin to laugh at an old man. What pleasures at my age. Miranda is clearly being flirtatious, and her grandson is playing along. What are your years, Grandma? You're still young. All right, I've talked you into it. I'll lie down a little longer. Jack cooked buckwheat porridge according to his recipe and wanted to wake up the mistress. But there was a knock at the door, and from behind the curtain came the disgruntled voice of an old woman. Who is it? Jack will ask first, and then open the door. The man did not follow his grandmother's instructions, but opened the door at once. Without waiting for an invite, happy. Can you at least tell me a secret? What position I was offered? Frank simply confessed. Maybe you wouldn't like the job, but for lack of other vacancies, you can work temporarily as a gamekeeper. It's relevant, given your education. But I'm a biotechnologist by degree. That's a long way from forestry. It's okay, Jack, you'll learn. The main thing now is to get a grip on something. Miranda started fussing over her grandson. Where to go? Not going, Frank. At least let him have breakfast. Will you join us? I would, Miranda, with great pleasure, but the car is waiting. Jack packed quickly, and before he slipped out the door, he reassured his grandmother. Don't worry about me. I'll work up an appetite and eat a double portion on my return. I'll be sure to bring you some. What kind of marshmallows do you like, more pink or white? The old woman, modestly drowning her eyes. I like chocolate, but it's very expensive. The men looked at each other, and Frank assured her that nothing is too much for the best great-grandmother. You'll have tea tonight. Chocolate-covered marshmallows. All the way. Jack was worried that he hadn't escaped Frank's attentive gaze. All right, no shaking, and for nothing. I told briefly about your biography, so the employer is aware. By the way, the man completely calmly accepted this fact, so don't worry about it. I'm sure that tomorrow you will be able to start guarding your site. There's one downside, though. Your property is a bit far from the forest. Miranda will be sad. That's okay. I'll visit her every day. Well, we'll discuss it later. Maybe we can get you some decommissioned equipment, but our mechanics can't do much. They'll build a car out of any scrap metal. Frank, how did you see the water? Jack was hired without question. The official in charge handed him a pen and a piece of paper. "I'll show you the boundaries of your plot. The old forester lived there with his family, so you can move in today. There's firewood. Can you get a generator from the warehouse?" He'd like to see the wheels of a man burned by Frank's eyes. "Frank, what's your bad habit of crossing the father?" "I don't know. It's a problem. We've got a lot of equipment that breaks down, and we can't afford spare parts, so pick something from the above. My guys in the yard can get any machine working." The scale of the reserve amazed Jack. They spent the whole day driving around the chief's woodlands, bringing the new employee up to speed. "Your plot is not part of the reserve, but still here you have to follow the same regulations that apply to special conservation areas. In principle, there's nothing complicated. As long as you follow the instructions. What's your education?" "Agronomic education. But I have long ago graduated and practically did not work in my specialty." "It doesn't matter. Just formalities to be observed, and don't hesitate to contact me if you have any difficulties." Jack arrived home late at night. Miranda was bored alone in front of the television. She rushed to her grandson with questions. "Jack, how did they take you?" "It's okay. The grannies accepted." "Where'd they put you?" "The allotment's way out in the boonies, so it's a long way for beggars." A familiar look of anxiety appeared in the old woman's eyes, and Jack tried to reassure the granny woman. "I'll visit you every day. Uncle Frank promised to help me with transportation." The old woman gestured to interrupt him, and suddenly said, "I'll go with you to the cordon. And don't look at me like that." "I don't want to. I'm alone in an empty house and I don't need much. Besides, I'm still on my own 2 feet." At first, Jack didn't pay much attention to his grandmother's wish. The next morning, he went by Frank's car to the new place of residence to assess the condition of the house there. When he returned home, Miranda's grandmother was already waiting for his iron. During his absence, the woman had even managed to box up a brand new television set. Seeing this picture, the man almost fainted. "Grandma, where are you going?" The woman was genuinely surprised. "How where?" "With you to the service. You do not look that I am old. I will be useful to you. I know the forest well and know herbs and medicinal herbs." Jack had nothing to do but to give in to his grandmother when they were loading the luggage into the car. Where did she come from? He immediately recognized the old lady from the bus who had been pestering him with questions. This time the woman was also curious. "Miranda, where are you going?" "I decided to get married again." She burst out laughing, showing the world her metal crowns. "And who would be interested in such a good thing? You can be a sand builder and be employed." Miranda replied with dignity, "You are only 2 years younger than me, so you still have a long way to go." While they were obviously thinking about how she could take a jab at her rival, Grandma Jack got into the car. She took pity on her acquaintance and already peacefully said with her grandson, "I'm going to the cordon. We will serve together with him." She immediately swallowed the bait and sank down the street, leaning on her cranberry. And what on earth is going on? A 100-year-old granny was going to guard the forest. The car did not have time to drive away for 200 meters, but from the fence showed the colors of fed-up shawls. And Miranda, with a sense of accomplishment, has now spotted our gossip. That's enough talk for a week. All my bones are being grinded. All along the way, Jack worried that he'd made rash decisions. Anything can happen to an old man. You can't even call an ambulance to the cordon. He mentally made a plan for the return of his grandmother, but in the evening of the same day changed his mind to realize it. Indeed, people of the older generation are much stronger than young people. In this, the new forester was convinced in the first week of his hermit clean in the forest. He thanked fate 100 times that he had brought his grandmother Miranda with him. She had experience in their worldly affairs, and with her help novice Igor managed in a few days to arrange a comfortable life. Despite all the fears and lack of experience, Jack quite quickly got used to the new life. At first, of course, he flinched at every suspicious rustle. Especially frightening to the man was the cry of an owl, which settled near the forest ranger's cabin. But Miranda felt completely safe in the woods. Jack even felt that her grandmother had become younger. Several times he offered her to Grandma. "It's boring here. Why don't you go back to the village? Didn't you talk me into it? I'm not going anywhere from you, and I'm not bored. I watch soap operas for my own pleasure." Frank's visits made my life more varied. My father's friend always came with gifts. One day he came with a car, the make of which could not be identified. The man, satisfied with the effect produced, walked around the vehicle and patted the hood of the car. Here Jack, the promised present, accept. The apparatus was really a noble one, something between a modern Jeep and a tractor. A design decision of mine. It's got a motor that'll last you 2 centuries. And don't look at the speed. Whoa, whoa, whoa. It's a bit of a gas guzzler though. But if you don't push the pedal, it's fine. With the arrival of the car, it became much easier not only to live, but also to fulfill his official duties. Now Jack made his rounds not on foot, but in his own car. Only in winter he had to get on skis and leave for the whole day to check the farthest corners of the site. 4 years passed. One winter day the forester was going on a round, and the caring grandmother tried to dissuade him. "Look how it's blowing. You'll get confused before you know it." "Grandma, I've gotten to know the forest pretty well by now. You shouldn't worry." "How could I not? There are wolves in packs. Frank told me they've been going into the village, and you might run into a bear. Take at least a gun with you. I'll invite you. And in the summer, I'll get a dog. To make you feel safer." That's right, you can't be in the woods without a dog. Jack spent the whole day in the woods. By late afternoon, it was starting to snow even harder. He hurried toward home. Suddenly, through the howling and jung, he heard a sound like the flickering of a kitten. The man listened, but it was quiet. He cursed aloud. "Wonderful." He decided to play hide and seek with me. "It won't work. You have an unclean power." He deliberately spoke loudly to ward off fear. Twilight was fast descending on the forest, and it was getting creepy. He moved forward, but the science didn't repeat itself again. What the hell was it? For several minutes the forester listened to the sounds of the blizzard, and the strange science was gone. The persistent man hurried toward the sound, expecting to see a lost furry animal. But he was dumbfounded when he discovered under a wonderful snowy bush a basket. Past it came from there. He stood at a loss, afraid to touch the basket because he realized that there was not a kitten in there, a small child. The basket was covered on top with woolen plaid. Jack opened only the edge of the blanket and saw at the bottom of this unusual cradle a bundle. What on earth was going on? What mother had left her child to perish? But instead of an answer, he heard a strange sound. It was already dark, and he could barely distinguish the creaking, studied figure of a woman under the snow. Life barely flowed in that young body or snickered. He realized that he had to hurry to rescue this unknown woman. He made something resembling a sledge out of his skis and carefully placed the victim on the skids. He removed the envelope from the basket and pressed it against his chest, covering it with a blunt. When he appeared at Miranda's house, Miranda did not notice at first that he was not alone. She immediately began to reprimand her grandson. "Where you've been beating yourself up. I can't find the place anymore. I thought something had happened to you." Granny on hold. The next moment he threw the precious roll out of his sinus. The old woman cried out in surprise. "A baby? But from where?" "I'll tell you all about it later. There's another find. Probably the mother of this baby or little girl. We'll figure it out later." He carried the frozen man and the girl in his arms. And Miranda reread Jack. "She's not alive. She's alive. Grandma's just really cold. You're more experienced than I am. Tell me what to do." A responsible assignment gave the old lady confidence. "We need to warm up the water first. And get some vodka. I saw you have some there. I need to rub it." The forester obediently followed the orders of the old woman, and she deftly carried out reanimation measures. Finally, the girl opened her eyes and asked where. "Where's my Liam?" Jack realized that Liam was the name of the baby. who began to give signs of life again. Don't worry, your boy is safe here, and you are currently in the woods, and it's a very good thing I found you by chance. How could you brave such a dangerous journey in a blizzard? The girl took small sips of hot tea. I need to find someone. The last bus to the village has already left, and a man told me to go through the woods. So I went and got lost. How can you take such a risk? If it was just about your life, what about the baby? The girl found herself coughing. I had no other choice. I'm sorry. It hurts to talk. I'll tell you everything later. We just need to find my mom to let her know I'm okay. We'll definitely find your mom and other relatives. But later. Right now, you need to get your strength back. Jack saw that the girl wanted to sleep. He covered her with a warm blanket and put wood in the stove. Now you'll agree quickly. Just tell me what to feed the child, showed Grandma Miranda. I've already warmed up some milk for him. We don't have anything else suitable. The young woman fell asleep. They didn't even get a chance to ask her name. Miranda was giving orders to Jack. I have the sheets. There are 4 pieces of white sheets, and bring them here. Jack quickly rushed to Nana's locker when Nana returned to the rubble over the baby. The baby was so tiny that Jack had never seen one before. He hadn't seen many babies at all, but this was definitely a first for sure. The child seemed to be listening intently to the grandmother, and she was either cursing or reasoning, but she was doing it in such an affectionate voice that it sounded like she was singing. How could this happen? It is not in the city, not in the village to get lost. It's in a remote forest. It's wolves. What was your foolish mother thinking? Well, at least it's still good. I wish she thought to take some of your belongings with her. What kind of stuff is that, though? 2 bottles, a pacifier, and 3 diapers. But that's okay. Liam will eat now and you'll go to bed. And in the morning, everything will be different. She kept saying and saying. The baby, having drunk almost half a bottle of milk, was pulling more and more weakly, and his eyes were completely closed. Finally, he pushed the pacifier out of his mouth, poked it a few times, and fell asleep. But here sleeps the little one. I wish it would get better. His arms and legs seemed warm. Maybe it's okay. But what about his mom? She went to the bed where the woman was placed. She stood there, looked at her, very young, about 25 years. If there is oh ho ho, Miranda stumbled, touched her forehead, and nodded satisfied. Nothing, she was already starting to sweat. God willing, and with her it will pass. She tossed her hair to the girl and froze. Jack, come here. Jack came quickly. Granny sounded a little strange. He looked where she was pointing. With Kolya, the girl had a fresh bruise because of his hobby. In his youth, Jack unmistakably determined the age of the bruise. It was no more than 4 or 5 days old. The old woman moved the blanket a little, freeing her neck and one shoulder. The woman's neck had very fresh purple stains on it, as if someone had just very recently pressed her neck with their hands. Wow. Yeah, Jack. Looks like she didn't wander into the woods on a whim, or she was hiding from someone, or she was transported. Grandma, what do you mean, imported? She's not a puppy. The old lady looked at him like he was an idiot. The usual. I was watching a TV show the other day. Jack threw his hands in the air. Grandma, I give up, but not the show. Let's go to bed. I have a feeling we're gonna have a busy day tomorrow. Miranda didn't argue. Why argue if her grandson's right? And she was tired. While she was spinning, she didn't realize she was old. As soon as she relaxed a bit, she got all bent out of shape. The old woman went to her behind the curtain to shake out the contents of her pockets from her clothes, the girl, the keys, the ticket, a little money. And it was a coupon, a pediatrician's coupon. And it was written out to Liam. Jack stared dumbfounded, staring at the piece of paper. It's just a coincidence. His brother's well into his 40s now. Maybe he named his son Robert. Anyway, why would he think that name could only belong to his brother? It can't be. Surely the town must be full of families with that information. He carefully put everything back together and looked at the child. Liam was sleeping sweetly and even a little. He was nodding off in his sleep. He must have been dreaming. Well, if one can dream at that age, and he was smiling. Jack squatted on a big armchair, which stood just between the bed, where the woman he had found lay, and the sofa, where the child slept in the cushions. It wasn't long before Jack fell asleep. Betty awoke, but was afraid to open her eyes. If her husband noticed she was awake, he would immediately start pestering her. Robert had changed not too long ago. Though no, she was just taking to herself. Robert was changing gradually. The first chime had been the day after their wedding, but she hadn't given it much thought at the time. And then there were more and more bells. The first time he hit her was when Betty came home from the hospital. She could see the intense pleasure he took in hitting her, in winding her hair around his hand, and making her face touch the floor. The woman knew she had to run. But Robert wasn't a fool either, and he told her right away that if anyone found out about what was going on in their home, Robert would take her child away from her immediately, forever. How would he do it? Her husband hadn't specified, but Betty was sure that he would not shy away from anything. How stupid was she? How could she believe a man like Robert? And it was only now that she realized he hadn't become like that. He'd always been like that. And now he was slowly opening up because he felt his impunity. Betty suspected that at first he had held back because he was afraid of her mother. And then, when he realized that they'd had their final falling out, he'd let out everything that had been in him for a long time. The strangest thing was that Betty realized he loved her. That's the kind of love he has. The more he abused her, the more he clung to her. I guess he liked the sacrifices, and she was sinking further and further into the mire. At first she wished all her friends, and her mom too, would take it back. She was always right about everything. She had been since she was 15. Since the day she hated her mother, she had made all decisions on her own, even if they were wrong. The main thing was that they had to be completely different from her mother's. I mean, she did the opposite on principle. Her mother tried many times to talk to her nicely without swearing. But Betty stubbornly kept saying one thing: "When you kicked out Dad, you asked my opinion. And now I won't ask yours." Her mother cried quietly, saying that when Betty grows up, she'll figure it out for herself. Those words explained Betty, so much so that she even jumped up and down. "Daddy loves me. He didn't want to leave. You're the one who ruined our family." True, over time began to realize that she did not need her father so much, because in a few years he did not live with them. He did not even once visited her, but his opinion of his mother did not change. It's out of grief, out of resentment. He's just in a lot of pain, so he can't bring himself to do it. When I'm finally independent, I'll find him and go to live with him. This opportunity came to her despite her mother's entreaties. Betty did not go to an institute. She went to a vocational school. She saw that her mother listened with horror to her words that she would study to be a paramedic. "Betty, how could it be?" I was thinking something. "It's only gonna be what you want it to be." "No, I am an adult now, and I will only do what I think is right." Mom cried in her room for a long time, and then she came out and said firmly, "As long as you live with me, you will do what I say. And I say that with your certificate you should get a higher education. And then you see, it's my job to educate you, you know, prepare you for the rest of your life." That's when Betty freaked out. She said so many things to her mother, and then she packed a bag and said, "I'm going to live with my father. I hope you won't hold me back." Her mother didn't hold her back. Betty's address was. She found it among her mother's things and papers. I forgot, by the way, to tell her that it should be shameful to first put a man out on the street and then demand child support money from him under the guise of official laws. I wouldn't be like that, and Dad would be at home, and the salary would be carried to the family. Daddy met her surprised and even a little scared. "Wendy, how did you find me?" Betty hung around his neck. "Daddy, I missed you so much. I'm coming to live with you. Mom's just sick of me." "Live how?" "Wait, how to live the normal way. I already went to bed with her. Now I'll live with you. Oh, Daddy, I'm so happy you're finally here for me. Betty must have been talking too loud because the disgruntled woman came out of the room. Oh my God. The hey, who's yelling like that? It's neither light nor dawn. Betty looked at her in surprise. Daddy, who is this woman? And why does she run this place? The woman stared at Betty. Who are you, sad? And I'll be in my apartment asking you what I should do. Your daddy's got nothing and not even a proper job. So if you're going to live with him, let's tighten our belts. I've got enough freeloaders as it is. You got yourself into this mess. The woman floated toward the bathtub. And Daddy, who was as if shorter in stature, saw her off and fed her. Don't be angry. It won't last long. Betty will soon make up with her mother and come home right away. The way they chewed was disgusting to watch, but she didn't want to go back to her mother. She endured a day at her father's when it was time to go to bed, sighed languidly, and said, "You'll have to sleep on the floor, because the sofa is white and also hard. You realize you'll ruin it, and there won't be a proper slant to the fabric issue." Betty wanted to be indignant, but her father was making desperate signs to her. The girl quickly gathered her bag and rushed out of the apartment. Her mother didn't say a word to her. Betty had quieted down a bit, even took the documents from the school and submitted them to the institute. Life seemed to be getting better, but her relationship with her mother was not getting better, even though she didn't say a word. Betty realized how much she had embarrassed herself in front of her. Betty was sure her mother was satisfied, and she didn't like that feeling. Valley. She was 3 courses into her senior year when she met Robert and immediately fell in love practically on the second day. Yes, Robert was completely different from the guys in the course. They seemed so yellow and molasses around him. And here was a man like that. Even though he had a first marriage under his belt, he wooed so beautifully. He said such words no matter that he was almost the same age as his father, maybe even a little older. Betty was proud of him. Then Robert introduced her to her mother, the old nasty aunt. But it didn't matter, because Betty wasn't going to socialize with her under any circumstances. Circumstances came soon enough. Robert proposed to her. She was over the moon. It's every girl's dream. And then Robert came to meet her and her mom. That's when Mom showed her true colors. She screamed. Betty had never heard her poised mother scream like that. She called Robert unpleasant epithets. She said she would bring him out into the open. And then she declared that she would not marry Robert. Betty. That was the last straw. Mom, don't you forget I'm 21 years old. So, what does it matter how old you are if you don't know what you're doing? Mom, my patience is wearing thin. I'm leaving with Robert, and we're getting married. Betty literally ripped herself out of her mother's arms and rushed down the stairs. And Robert, importantly, followed close behind. She and her mother never spoke or saw each other again. How many times she picked up the phone to call, to cry. But she felt so ashamed in front of her mother that Betty just hung up. Betty knew her husband and his nasty mom were afraid of someone. Only she couldn't hear who it was. And then, when Robert and her mother were having a real bender by the fireplace and talking for a long time, and Betty was hiding behind a chair, she heard it all. And she also heard something that she tried to forget, because it turned out that even she was a little touched by this story after the maternity hospital. When Robert once again beat her up, she shouted in his face that she knew everything, knew who she and her mother had given money to in order to put an innocent man in jail. Then Robert took her by the throat, lifted her up, and said one word, and that's it. And you'll lose Liam forever, and I promise you that. The next night she ran. There was no time to prepare, so she went light. Found the right route, almost made it, and in the woods she got confused. Betty shuddered in a way that made her wonder. It's not like she's home, which means she's in no danger. She opened her eyes. Where was her Liam? But she saw him right away. He was being rocked in her arms by an old grandmother who was sitting in a chair. The old lady noticed that she was awake. Awake. That's good. Jack drove his monster to the village to buy milk for the baby. I can hear him coming back. The grandmother handed her Liam and went to meet her grandson. She saw that the young mom was terrified and decided to give her a few minutes to gather her thoughts. Jack walked in and smiled, but I see everyone is alive. Cheers. Jack, Jack, Jack. Jack looked surprised first at the young mom and then at the grandmother. Do we know each other? Or my husband Robert? Do you know him? Jack slowly put the jar on the table and Miranda sat down in the chair. Her legs didn't feel right. More than anything, she didn't want her grandson's path to cross with these people again. Yes, unfortunately, I've met them. I know who he paid off. I know who helped him put you away. Jack was silent for a long time. Then he said, I don't want to dredge up the past. I don't want to, that's all. Betty cried. I understand. I'm sorry. I thought you were the kind of man who could protect me. Jack, I could ask you to tell my mom about me. We've been fighting for a long time. She was against me marrying Robert. I acted like a complete fool. If you tell her, she'll take me away. Please, please. Okay, I'll call. No, she won't talk to you about me. I'm so confused. I have to go to her, and I have to go as soon as possible. Otherwise, Robert will start looking for me, and sooner or later he'll find me. He's capable of anything. Jack looked at Betty thoughtfully, then said, write down the address and get dressed. I'm not here yet. Stay at Frank's. There's a policeman nearby if you need anything. The old lady helped Betty put on his things. Hold that kid's tree tight. Betty cuddled her sleeping son to her. She looked once more into Jack's eyes. Jack, Robert promised me that he would deprive me of Liam forever. Do you understand? Do you understand? Jack grinned wickedly. Robert had never had much pity in him. Let's go. We should be back before dark. He explained the whole situation to Frank in a nutshell. The man was understandable, so he didn't ask any unnecessary questions. Don't worry, everything will be fine. If anything, we'll keep the defense. And then I'll call the district police officer to keep things interesting. Let him write down the testimony. It'll be less trouble later. I hope you'll get the case overturned. Jack didn't say anything. He got in the car and turned around. I'll make it quick. Don't drive fast. It's snowing. Jack looked at the paper again. There's a sign right over there. It's a big yard, a new house. Even his monster had a place from all over the yard to his car. Was rushing to his car is a Hummer, Santa, Hummer. Where do you see the emblem? It's a different damn thing. I forget what it's called. You never knew. What a connoisseur. Jack grinned and rushed to the driveway. A lady was just coming out of it, and Jack almost knocked her down. The woman immediately turned around. No, look at this. Middle of the day, and they're already on the horns knocking people over. And they promised that the house was elite, that there would be no such people here. What's going on? Jack didn't listen. He just flew upstairs. He pressed the bell at the right apartment. He didn't take his hand off until the door opened. Who's got nothing better to do? Jack was dumbfounded in a second, even remembered Betty's name. She was staring at him in amazement and even fear. It's you. The woman paid. But why did you come? It wasn't my fault. I was dismissed from the case at once. As soon as I started digging for the culprit, he pushed her aside and stepped inside. The woman shut the door. You've come to take revenge on me. Jack turned to her. No, I came to you because I have your daughter hiding with a small child. She's covered in bruises and her boyfriend. Her husband's looking for them so he can take her son away from her. As he spoke, the woman's eyes opened wider and wider. No way, Jack sighed. How different are women from men after all? Compare Frank meeting a complete stranger to Betty, his own mother. He managed to explain everything in a few minutes, already less. I wonder how many more times this story will have to be retold. Betty rushed into the room. I'll just get dressed and make a phone call, and we'll be on our way right away. He could hear her explaining something to someone on the phone, as if she were a prosecutor. How much do women like to give orders? No matter what the situation. Finally, she got out. They drove at a brisk pace. They went out into the yard, and Betty stared at his car, covered with children. I take it this is yours. Definitely getting comfortable. Betty looked at her Beetle, which next to this car looked like a mouse, and resolutely sat down. They were just getting started. How did her phone ring? Yeah, we're on our way. But you don't confuse our car with any other car. You can see everything. Did Jack see a black van pull up behind them in the mirror? That's what SWAT guys drive. I thought I was just on my way. But no car. Sitting tight on their tail. I don't get it. Tailed us. No, they're specially trained people. I didn't realize they were following us, but they're gonna pick up Betty and the baby and take them to a safe house. Then they'll take care of her men. Jack was quiet for a while. Then he asked Betty, "Are you still working as an investigator?" Who knows her? Maybe she's so good friends with the SWAT team that no one can say no to her. But you can only do that if you're an investigator. No, it's been a long time. Who are you then? She smiled weakly. I am the chief prosecutor of this city. Jack took a breath. Wow, that's the bird in his car. If his cellmates had known he'd be carrying a man like that, they'd have killed him back then. When the village was only 10 kilometers away, a car passed them at high speed. Jack frowned. I'm surprised they don't come to us like this, and so fast. Betty snatched up the phone. The car was seen behind her. The van effortlessly passed Jack's car and sped forward. Yeah, I wish it had been faster, but the old man was already going 100 kilometers. And that was his record. When they flew into the village, Jack realized that everything had already happened. He didn't know what had happened yet, but he knew it had because people were rushing toward the chairman's house. Hell, that there was a real crowd standing outside the house. They jumped out of the car and rushed to the wicket. Robert and two other men were lying face down in the snow. Robert lifted his head and looked at Jack with hatred, but then he got a hard shove between the shoulder blades and immediately sank back into the snow. Betty jumped out of the house and rushed to her mother. Mommy, I'm sorry." Betty hugged her daughter and breathed a sigh of peace. "It's all right, daughter, it's all right. Your grandson will show you that." Frank was sitting on the porch. The local paramedic tried to reattach his wounded arm, but he waved it off. "Lawman got here early. I'd show that man where the crayfish are. He's a piece of work. He thought he'd abuse a girl and his own child." Alas, he smiled. "That's a real man like that. What kind of men are we supposed to be?" "Frank, thank you for nothing to thank me for. We should have taken him to the woods at night and left him there. Let him be in their skin." Robert had his buddies loaded into the car. People began to disperse, and Jack managed to get Frank into the house. There, at last, the paramedic got to work on him. Betty was holding Liam, who was smiling at her. That's how it is. In the morning I was almost young, quite attractive, and by evening I was already a grandmother. Betty clung to her and smiled. "Well, daughter, shall we go home?" "Oh, and I don't have a car." "In the bathhouse said to spend the night and tonight at our place, and tomorrow I'll take you. I'm tired today, and I'm not smiling. I'll put the jar on. We'll set the table. Where to in such bad weather?" A snowstorm had really started to break out outside. Betty looked at her daughter confused. But Betty said, "Mom, go for it. You don't know how good it is out there. And how good it is when you don't have to be afraid of anything. Even I can't imagine." In the evening, when everyone was already asleep, Jack sat in the kitchen and looked thoughtfully at the fire. He had specially made a big transparent door in the stove so that he could look at the flames without disturbing them. He turned around. Standing in the doorway was Betty. "No," she sat down. "Jack, can we at least just be home?" "Jack?" "Yeah, sure." "Jack, I realize everyone's been cut out. Their years are gone. But now is a good opportunity for some justice to be done. And don't tell me I won't believe you anyway. I have every reason to reopen the case along with a service check. Jack was silent for a long time. William did not hurry him. Realized that he needed to think about the war. That is what he thought about, until she came to him, and even before her decided that the year, of course, he will not return. Honest name. I can do that. All right, let's try it. The case was loud. Hats flew off a lot of heads. All the papers talked about it for a week. Betty had a heart attack. Jack shouted the last one. Why don't you die with your mommy and daddy? Jack twitched, but held back as he met Betty's gaze. The process was over. Jack was offered several jobs at once. All the money that Robert and his mother had in the account was given to him to buy a house. But Jack knew his beloved grandmother was waiting for him at home in the woods. He drove home and admired the forest, which was just beginning to wake up first leaves, first blades of grass. But could he apply this beauty to the city? He only had time to dine without an epithet. Really, because he kept thinking of Betty. Jack chased those thoughts away from his mind. The stupidity of being an ex-con and her being the chief prosecutor. He left quickly because it was getting harder not to look at her. The most important thing was how he felt. Betty wouldn't take her eyes off him either. Just got up from the table. Like Grandma said, someone's here. Who could it be in the middle of the night? Jack went out. The old lady came out too. Betty got out of the little car. She opened the back door and out popped a puppy. He must have been very young, judging by his behavior, but he was the size of a small lamb. Welcome to the house. This is Max, and he will be your friend. Jack walked up to her, looked her in the eye with his tongue. And you're the prosecutor. Betty didn't look away, stared into his eyes for a long time. Then she smiled. I'm not a prosecutor anymore. I retired. Well, filed a report, and if I may, I'd like to stay close to an ex-con. In the bathhouse, took her in his arms. They didn't see anyone or anything. An old little woman on the porch baptized them and said, "That's good, and it's good how things turned out. We gave him a piece of happiness. Now it's not scary to die."